But if it's not a sitting governor or a sitting senator, you will see something akin to 1992 when Pat Buchanan challenged George Bush. And what I always say is this. The history shows that a primary challenge to Trump will be unsuccessful. But if people like me cannot create a landing spot within the Republican Party for reasonable Republicans, an alternative to Trump, then that party is lost, and where do people like me go? Right now, there's nowhere else to go. So you're going to see an alternative to Trump emerge in 2020, and I think that's the reticence you're hearing in some of the answers to Manu when he asks these questions.
Right, Manu Raju was the one tracking all these members of Congress down. What about the alternative to the alternative, Congressman Jolly, which is, you know, you listen to Senator Corker. He says he's not entirely sure Trump will even run for re-election. Yeah. Why do you think Corker's even floating that out there?
Because the man, Donald Trump, who is defined by nothing more than his own ego, cannot risk going out a loser. And so I think there's a theory out there that I would subscribe to that would say Donald Trump will declare victory in 2020, say he drained the swamp, he fixed everything Obama broke, and he's going back to New York to make money. It allows him to go out a winner, and a lot of these legal troubles fade into history if he can survive that long.
David Jolly, we shall see. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you, Brooke. Thank you.
Coming up, famous musician here, listen to me, a magician, never supposed to reveal their secrets, but that is precisely what David Copperfield has been forced to do, what the illusionist just told a Las Vegas courtroom.
This is Lobster Fest at Red Lobster, with exciting new dishes like dueling lobster tails and lobster truffle mac and cheese. Classics like Lobster Lover's Dream are here too. So enjoy these 10 lobster-licious dishes now, because Lobster Fest ends April 22nd.
Running a business means I can't waste time, especially when I'm hiring.
He is billed as the greatest illusionist of our time, but magician David Copperfield has been forced to reveal one of his trade secrets in a Las Vegas courtroom. Copperfield and the MGM Grand are being sued by a British tourist who says he suffered permanent brain injury while participating in the lucky number 13 illusion. This was back in 2013. On the witness stand in the civil trial against him, Copperfield explained in open court how his trademark trick works.
You were like a horse with blinders on. You said tunnel vision. Is that what you meant by that?
I meant focusing, tunnel vision, only thinking about the audience going through the space to make sure it was clear.
You weren't thinking about, you weren't noticing everything. Your peripherals weren't in use at that time.
I was looking for the tape, the cut, the things, all those things that I focused on.
I see that we are going to be doing this for a very long time because you just want to keep doing that. And how many times can I ask the judge to instruct you? Really?
Next question.
Judge should move to strike.
Next question.
This is incredible. Ashley Banfield, host of HLN's Crime and Justice with Ashley Banfield. I mean, he doesn't want to give up the special sauce.
I wouldn't. I wouldn't want to.
Why is this such a huge deal?
So it's a big deal because otherwise this would be a personal injury story. We would never give it the light of day. But it's
Right.
David Copperfield.
Of course.
And this magic show that he has in Vegas is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And magic, as we all know from our birthday parties when we were 8, is a big deal for a lot of people. And you don't give up the secrets of the tricks. Some of these tricks are really labyrinthian and intricate. And the one that he's got is the finale. So it is the biggest trick that he has.
This is when all, like, the participants, he gets people to come up on, it starts on stage.
13 of them.
13 of them, and then poof, they're in the back of the theater.
In about a minute to a minute 20, they go from being on this raised platform that's circled with a barrier, a sheet of some kind, and you cannot see anything beneath the barrier. You can't see any little feet coming off the barrier. What they have coughed up on this trick is something I think we already all know. They don't really disappear, Brooke.
They don't?
I'm sorry.
Stop it.
Santa Claus is at issue as well here, too. But they end up in the back of the theater. They run through a labyrinthian tunnel, throughout the theater to get to the back of the theater. But for the audience, they never see these feet getting off this raised platform.
So it's like, how do they do that?
How do they do that? So that, by the way, he did not cough that up yet.
He's back in court next week. We'll see if he gives up the special sauce then. Let us know. Ashley Banfield, thank you so very much. Next here, back to our breaking news in just an hour before James Comey talks to Jake Tapper, his former deputy at the FBI, one step closer to facing a criminal investigation. We're going to talk about Andrew McCabe next. And is the president's lawyer about to flip? Why one of President Trump's former lawyers is warning him, no doubt, Michael Cohen will roll.
We knew Angie's List had reviews of home pro.
I'm Brooke Baldwin. Thanks for being with me here on this Thursday afternoon. We have breaking news on two huge stories, both about the FBI. One, the memos fired FBI Director James Comey wrote on his interactions with President Trump are headed to Congress today. Remember that pledge of loyalty the president denied he ever asked? And the pending release is happening just as we're getting new details on Comey's former deputy at the FBI, Andrew McCabe. McCabe is now one step closer to possibly facing a criminal investigation. McCabe was fired last month, just days before retiring from the FBI after his 21 years at the agency. So I have Laura Jarrett and Pamela Brown standing by for those breaking details. Pamela, first to you on Andy McCabe. Tell me more about this case.
So, Brooke, we have learned that the Justice Department Inspector General has sent a criminal referral to the top prosecutor in the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office on Andrew McCabe in the wake of this scathing IG report that was just released last week that laid out the case that McCabe had lied to investigators and his former boss, James Comey, on at least 4 occasions, including 3 times under oath. So what's happening here is the Inspector General is now asking investigators, prosecutors with the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office to consider possible criminal charges against McCabe. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean that is going to happen. As you'll recall, Brooke, there was a criminal referral on the Clinton email server. The FBI looked into it. No charges were pressed. So in this case, what would happen is the D.C. prosecutor would look at the facts of the case and then make a decision based on the findings. But this report, this scathing report on Andrew McCabe, was the basis for his firing last month. He has denied that he ever misled investigators. In fact, with James Comey, he said that he did tell him that he was authorizing the disclosure of information to the Wall Street Journal in an article about the Clinton Foundation. Comey told investigators that that was not the case. You'll recall just yesterday, Comey on The View said that good people lie. Andrew McCabe lied, according to the IG. And then Andrew McCabe's team released a statement saying essentially that the IG report was not based on facts and evidence, and they are standing by their story that Andrew McCabe did not mislead investigators. It is not that unusual, Brooke, for context here, for a criminal referral to happen in the wake of an IG report. I think that is important to note, but it's certainly serious as well, even though it's not unusual, because you have a group of what are supposed to be nonpartisan, non-biased lawyers who are referring this to prosecutors to consider potential criminal charges, and we're dealing with the former deputy director of the FBI here, Brooke.
Right. And you brought up Comey and his role in all of this. Just a reminder to everyone, he's sitting down with Jake in 60 minutes from now. Meantime, Laura Jarrett, to you on these Comey memos, remind us what they are and when lawmakers will actually be able to see them.
So there are at least 7 different memos, at least that we're aware of. And the issue is that some of them arguably contain classified information. They're James Comey's contemporaneous notes from different interactions that he had with President Trump, and he memorialized them. And there's also an issue of whether they could have been part of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. Several different outlets, including CNN and others, had tried to get our hands on the Comey memos, and we sued in court for them, and we lost. And the judge said they're part of Mueller's investigation. They have to stay secret for now. But the Justice Department is prepared, I am told, according to a source, to make them available to Congress, whether they're going to be provided completely unredacted or they'll be provided in a redacted form. It remains to be seen. But as CNN's Manu Raju reported yesterday, members of Congress say they need to be made public and are prepared to hit the Justice Department with a subpoena if they do not hand them over, Brooke.
All right, Laura, thank you very much. Let's get to the legal experts and their analysis of what we just heard and more. With me now, CNN legal analyst and former lawyer for the Trump campaign deputy, Rick Gates. He is Shan Wu. And Kim Whaley, who served as Associate Independent Counsel in the Whitewater investigation. So great to have both of you on. And Kim, let me just start with you on what we just heard from Pam with regard to the former deputy over at the FBI, Andy McCabe. So you heard Pam point out that he could face criminal charges and that this is not all entirely unusual. What are considerations here moving forward?
Well, at this point, it looks like it's being sent over to the Justice Department to actually do a more careful factual investigation as to whether there is potentially a crime here. It's not dissimilar to what's happening in the Mueller investigation with respect to other individuals. And then they'll make a determination as to whether there's something to move forward to from a criminal standpoint. I mean, I think hopefully what we're seeing is equal opportunity justice here, that these decisions are being made based on the facts and the law and not based on political affiliations. And I think it's important for the public to hear that the Justice Department needs to function independent of the political process.
Okay, let me move off of that. We'll watch that, of course, as it travels forward. But let's talk about the president's personal attorney, Michael Cohen. And Shan, this is for you, because we know the president's former divorce lawyer, Jay Goldberg, was actually called up, so he says, by the president, and was asked for advice, and that he told the president that Cohen is likely to flip under criminal investigation, especially if you're looking down 30 years in prison. What do you make of Jay Goldberg's warning, and do you think that that's a fair conclusion?
I think that's a fair concern to have. I think Goldberg knows his former client well, and that probably the best way to get advice to the president is through the media. It's absolutely true that anybody facing any criminal investigation is under a tremendous amount of pressure. And this is an unusually aggressive, unusually high-pressure situation. The fact that they executed a search warrant on a lawyer's office, highly aggressive tactic, very intrusive, and that really ratchets up the pressure on Mr. Cohen.
But if you're saying he's using the media to try to talk to the president, the guy's on the phone with the president. Why is he telling the public about his conversation, do you think?
My speculation there would be that he knows that when he goes out into the public, that the president likes to watch the media, and the more amplification he gets, the more effective it may be.
Gotcha. Kim, this lawyer, Goldberg, who used to be a U.S. attorney, told our Gloria Borger, quote, anybody who is facing 30 years never stands up. Without exception, a person facing a prison term cooperates. We know he has a family. He's mentioned that recently. Obviously, I have to imagine that comes into play here. What is the average flip rate in these kinds of court cases?
Well, I don't know in terms of empirically what the answer to that is, but what I do think is interesting is, of course, there are two issues here. One has to do with whether Mr. Cohen has personal criminal liability. And if that's the case, he can make whatever deals offered for him personally. The other question is whether flipping means he's got information that is going to implicate the President of the United States. And I think that's an extraordinary conversation to be having. Like, if there's nothing to hide on from this president's standpoint, this is irrelevant information. And Mr. Cohen will go forward with respect to his own personal criminal liability, and the president's out of it. So
inference. Let me hammer home on the point I think you're making. The inference, if he's having a conversation with the president about flipping, that then would mean the president did something wrong.
Right. Otherwise, it's not an issue. I mean, right. It doesn't really matter. It's beside the point. I think it's absolutely astonishing as a matter of what's happening at the upper echelons of our government on both sides of the aisle right now, that we're having a conversation as to what Mr. Cohen's decision making with respect to his familial obligations are if he were to be given the opportunity to turn coat and give evidence with respect to the president's criminal liability. I mean, that's astonishing. We all should be concerned that anyone in that kind of position could even potentially be flipping in order to put the president in some kind of jeopardy, or that he'd have information that could put the president in some kind of jeopardy. That has implications for democracy, not just this president.
Yeah. Shan, on that, and we know, as we pointed out, you served on the legal team representing Rick Gates, who was cooperating with investigators, and that is an entirely separate issue and a separate investigation. But can you just help us explain? I don't know how much you can say about that specifically, but when you are dealing with a client who is considering cooperating or flipping, what are the considerations? What is one thinking about as to whether or not they should roll?
The most important consideration is that the client has to be 100% honest, understand what they're getting into. I can't speak about the Gates matter because that's confidential and it's privileged, but generally speaking, the client must be very clear that if you choose to cooperate, it's like being pregnant. There's not such a thing as being a little bit pregnant. You either are or you aren't. So if you cooperate, everything is going to be an open book. And to the point made earlier about the flipping issue, simply the fact of cooperation doesn't necessarily, of course, mean that you have criminally culpable information against the president, but rather that he is agreeing to cooperate rather than raising the shield of the Fifth Amendment. And then it's really up to the prosecutors to determine whether that information he has to give is going to be helpful in terms of criminal liability or not.
How do you, given Gates cooperating, a couple other former Trump associates cooperating, and now the consideration that, you know, maybe, who knows, but maybe Cohen could be cooperating, Kim, how would this sit on someone such as the president?
Well, I think for the president, if I were advising the president, I would tell him that he really needs, as other lawyers have told him, to ratchet down, stop the public commenting. And with regard to one of the pieces of advice given to him, which is to not sit down with the special counsel, I think that's right. For most politicians, yes, I think for most politicians that's wrong, because if they refuse to sit down, it looks suspicious. They may get a grand jury subpoena. They may have to invoke the Fifth Amendment, which looks terrible. But he is not most politicians, so I don't think that would bother him.
All right, Shannon, Kim, thank you so much. And we're talking about this former divorce lawyer of the president's, Jay Goldberg. He will be on tonight at 7 o'clock with Aaron Burnett here on CNN, so definitely don't miss that conversation. Coming up next, President Trump reportedly is consumed by the news about Michael Cohen. We have new details about the White House's thinking with regard to that case. And Senator Tammy Duckworth making history, bringing her baby to the Senate floor just moments ago. There they are. You will hear what she had to go through to get the rules changed to allow for this. And breaking news on Mike Pompeo's nomination to become Secretary of State. We have just learned a key Democratic senator will now vote yes. Stay with me. Pompeo's nomination to become the next Secretary of State. We have just learned a key Democratic senator will vote yes. With me now, Dana Bash, CNN's chief political correspondent. Dana, that senator is Heidi Heitkamp. Why is she saying yes?
35.8%. That is the reason she is saying yes, because that is the percentage that Donald Trump won her state in 2016. And she is, as you said, a Democrat. And if she wants to win re-election in November, it is probably not the greatest political move, Brooke, to say, no, Mr. President, I am not going to give you the Secretary of State that you want. So that, in a nutshell, is the big reason, really the only reason why she is doing what she's doing, and the reason why it is very likely, I would even go so far as to say probable, that we are going to see similar announcements from Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who also is from a very red state, very pro-Trump state, where the president also won by more than 30 points. So go ahead.
Sorry. What about Rand Paul? We heard the president. He hasn't disappointed me in the past, or to that effect. Yesterday, he met with Mike Pompeo today. What are you thinking?
You know, Rand Paul is different. For Rand Paul, this is not an electoral question. Obviously, it's not a party question, because unlike Heidi Heitkamp, Rand Paul is a fellow Republican of the president's. For Rand Paul, this is a very specific role that oversees issues that, in terms of his principle, he has been a long time sort of opponent of, and somebody who is outspoken on issues like just big picture interventionism, concerned about the things that Pompeo has known about and worked through at the CIA in terms of intelligence, and Rand Paul's estimation, overreach in terms of civil liberties. So for him, it is a purely principled issue and question. And so be interesting to see, Brooke, if the president is able to kind of twist his arm to make the argument that, look, I, the president, need in this position somebody who I can trust and who the world knows I have a good relationship with, so he can represent me. So far, it doesn't seem like that's an argument that holds sway over Rand Paul. But can I just quickly go back to the Heidi Heitkamp thing and why this matters? And it is because we are going to see a vote in the Foreign Relations Committee on Monday that nobody thinks is going to go through in a positive way. So what that means is that the majority leader is almost certainly going to take the nomination of Mike Pompeo to be Secretary of State to the floor. And so it's going to be up to a few Democrats to give the president this vote. That's why Heidi Heitkamp and her decision to cross party lines is so critical, and why we're looking to see if a few others do the same.
Got it. So that's Monday. How about in 45 minutes from now? We've got James Comey on the air being interviewed by Jake Tapper. We know a White House official is telling CNN that the president has, quote unquote, weathered the fired FBI director, right, and all of the TV appearances. But the legal jeopardy involving his personal lawyer is, quote, consuming him. We're also told the president is pleased with how Republicans in the White House have tried to discredit Comey in recent weeks. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is some terrific reporting from our colleague Jeff Zeleny about the fact that the president is not just sort of feeling like he weathered the Comey storm, but very upset and consumed, as you mentioned, with Michael Cohen. I mean, Michael Cohen, this is the ultimate question of loyalty, the ultimate question of somebody who the president has trusted with the most sensitive of issues for years, whether or not Michael Cohen will still have the president's back, even in the face of potentially really important, really devastating legal jeopardy. I mean, I make that assumption based on the fact that a federal judge and the president's Justice Department said it was okay to raid his home, or at least his hotel where he's staying, as well as his office. So it's very, very interesting. I will just say on the Comey thing, maybe the president feels okay because we haven't seen Jake Tapper interview James Comey yet.
He better be ready. Dana, thank you so much. Again, just a reminder to all of you, we are 40 minutes away from Jake's live interview with James Comey. Do not miss the tough questions he will have for the fired FBI director on the lead at the top of the hour. Stay right here. Next, the hero firefighter who helped pull that Southwest passenger from the window speaking out for the first time. You will hear that. And I'll talk live to a retired Navy pilot to explain incredible actions from the woman in the cockpit of that plane.
Half shot skin, flat white, extra.
and he spoke earlier today, fighting back tears when asked about the married mother of two.
People aboard that plane, God put people on that plane for a reason, and you know, that's everybody acted, and everybody stood strong. There was a family that lost a loved one. You know, I feel for her family. I feel for her two kids, her husband, the community that she lived in. I can't imagine what they're going through.
The Southwest Hero pilot, Captain Tammy Jo Schultz, issued a statement saying that she was, quote, simply doing her job. With me now, Carrie Lorenz, the first female F-14 Tomcat fighter pilot in the U.S. Navy. Carrie, welcome, and thank you so much for your service.
Oh, it was a privilege, Brooke. Thank you very much.
So when you first found out that this hero pilot was a former Navy fighter pilot, your first thought was what?
Well, thankful that she was. That crew was they were both military members, and as you can see, very, very quickly, they defaulted to their training. They did what they had to do, even under extremis.
Landing, she had flown all these F-18s. Landing an F-18 on that, strip on an aircraft carrier, which is something I think she did over and over and over once upon a time. I know that is one of the toughest skills to master in military aviation. Can you just talk about how her background and her instincts came into play?
Absolutely. Well, this was a really unfortunate circumstance with a tragic ending. But when you're at altitude and your cockpit, the whole cabin decompresses like that, you default immediately to the training that you've received. And that's going through checklists. That's maintaining control. And one of the golden rules in military aviation that we as naval aviators learn is very simply aviate, navigate, communicate. And by that, the first thing you have to do, no matter what is happening, you have to fly the airplane and then figure out, where do we need to go? How do we get to where we need to go safely and as quickly as we can? And the final step in that is to communicate what it is that we are going to do. And as you can see, Captain Schultz very quickly did that. She took command, she started telling people what it was that she needed, and she handled it like the pro that she is.
This conversation, this clip, I want to play this. This is a conversation with the air traffic control. Listen to how cool and calm she is when you hear her tell the tower a piece of her plane is missing. Roll it.
Start looking for the airport. It's off to your right and slightly behind you there. And altitude is your discretion. Use caution for the downtown area.
Okay, could you have the medical meet us there on the runway as well? We've got injured passengers.
Injured passengers, okay, and is your airplane physically on fire?
Not fire, but part of it's missing. They said there was a hole and someone went out.
I'm sorry, you said there was a hole and somebody went out? Southwest 1380, it doesn't matter. We'll work it out there.
I would not have been so cool, calm, and collected. Let me just say that, Carrie.
Well, it's definitely a skill set and a mindset that to be a military pilot, you have to be able to compartmentalize very quickly. And when you're in extremis, when you're doing your job, there is no room for emotion. And at the end of the day, you have to have that ability to compartmentalize, to go through your checklist, to default again to that training so that you get not only yourself to where you need to go safely, but all those people who are counting on you as well.
Carrie Lorenz, thank you so very much. I appreciate it. And all of your hours and expertise. Coming up next here, the two African-American men arrested at a Philadelphia Starbucks. They are speaking out today for the very first time. This is the city's police commissioner personally apologizes for making the situation worse.
Today, you have heard from James Comey.
Calls for a national boycott of Starbucks. Today, the two black men who were handcuffed and removed from a Starbucks for not buying something are breaking their silence. Rashawn Nelson and Dante Robinson say they went to a Starbucks for a business meeting, but within minutes of arriving, they were handcuffed by police and placed in the back of a squad car. Here is part of their interview from Good Morning America.
Initially, as soon as they approached us, they just said we have to leave. There was no question of, was there a problem here between you guys and the manager? What happened?
When you were arrested, did they tell you what you were being arrested for?
No, not at the time. He wasn't read any rights. Nothing. Just double lock, handcuffs behind our back, and escorted out and put into a squad car. I want to make sure that in this situation doesn't happen again. So what I want is for a young man or young men to not be traumatized by this and instead motivated, inspired.
This is something that has been going on for years, and everyone's blind to it, but they know what's going on, if you get what I mean. And, just really taking those actions and putting them into place and, help people understand that it's not just a black people thing. This is a people thing. And that's exactly what we want to see out of this, and that's true change. So put action into place and stop using your words.
Not just a black people thing, but a people thing. Solomon Jones is with me. He is radio host for Philadelphia's Praise 107.9. Solomon, thank you so much. I know this has been a huge, huge topic for you on your show. Thanks for joining me.
Yes, it has. Yes, thanks for having me, Brooke. Appreciate it.
You got it. Listen, the thing that a lot jumped out at me listening to the interview with Robin this morning, but in that interview, 2 minutes from when those guys sat down to when the manager called 911. 2 minutes.
Yeah. It really just reminds me of so many other incidents that have turned out worse than this one. Tamir Rice, the police officers pull up and in a matter of seconds, they shoot that little boy for playing with a toy gun. In this case, 2 minutes. They show up, and the men say in that interview that they didn't even know why the police were there, that they were saying to themselves, well, they can't be here for us because nobody's told us anything. And suddenly there's 6 police officers surrounding them. It really is a case of racial profiling in a neighborhood, Rittenhouse Square, that is a very rich neighborhood, a very white neighborhood, where we've had problems with stop and frisk, where only 3% of the people in that neighborhood are black, and yet 67% of those who are stopped by police in that neighborhood are black. And so this is an ongoing problem, and hopefully this is the beginning of some solutions, not only for this situation, but as Dante Robinson said, for many others like it.
On the solution piece, Solomon, we know that the Starbucks CEO has met with these 2 men. He has apologized face-to-face. He has called this reprehensible. We know they're shutting down 8,000 Starbucks stores at the end of May for racial bias training. Is that enough?
No, because they need to be shutting down the stores now for racial bias training. We've seen other videos where a white person was led into the restroom without buying anything, given the code, and a black person right behind him was not let into the restroom. So this is an ongoing problem, not just at Starbucks, but I think in many places where black people are profiled. And so until such time that we know that this manager is gone and will never come back, until such time that we know that the racial bias training has been done, until such time that we know that black people have been promoted into positions of management where they can make decisions around who goes, who stays, who gets in the bathroom, etc., I will not be satisfied. And I've been going to Starbucks for years, but I will be boycotting until such time that these conditions are met.
You close your whole piece in the Philadelphia Daily News by writing, until Starbucks commits to treating my brothers like whole persons, I will boycott every one of their stores. You talk about putting people of color in managerial positions. I was looking at some of the numbers today. Starbucks touts its diversity. They say 66% of their workers are women, and that 43% are minorities. Solomon is boycotting a company where a number of their workers are people of color, are women, is boycotting the most effective way to express your displeasure?
I think in a capitalistic society, boycotting is always the most effective way to express your displeasure, because when you can hit a company's bottom line, then that is a message that goes beyond just words, beyond just protests. It affects the company, and so I think it's always effective. But let me say this, that the way that systemic racism works is sort of like a chess game. No matter whether the piece is black or whether the piece is white, if it's a knight, it can only move in an L shape. If it's a bishop, it can only move diagonally. And so it doesn't matter if you have people in position that look like me, if the only thing that they can do is work within a system that is in itself racist. And so Starbucks needs to be having that training now, because apparently it is not working to have just people in positions where they can only do what the company policies, spoken and unspoken, say that they can do.
Solomon Jones, thank you for your voice. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Coming up next, President Trump threatens to walk out of his meeting with Kim Jong-un if it doesn't go well, if it's not, his word, fruitful. This as North Korea reportedly makes a major concession before those talks. We'll get into that. Also, anytime the president speaks to reporters, it's always, shall we say, a surreal experience. Crystal Liza is up. He's analyzing the patterns from a Trump news conference.
Keith and Melissa live next to Melissa.
he likes a foe, and past administrations. Anytime he talks about North Korea, he essentially says, this should have already been solved. Every past president, every past administration did a poor job. I want to point out one other thing we've noticed. He always leaves things open-ended. Well, we may have a meeting. Maybe we won't have a meeting. We'll see what happens. Now, on we'll see what happens, check this out.
Unless they offer us a deal that we cannot refuse, I would not go back into TPP. We'll see what happens. I hope you're going to tell that caravan not to get up to the border. And I think they're doing that because as of 12 minutes ago, it was all being broken up. We'll see what happens. So we'll see what happens with the peace process. I'm very disappointed with the Attorney General, but we will see what happens. Something could happen with respect to the Paris Accord. We'll see what happens. As far as North Korea is concerned, I don't know. We'll see what happens. We're looking at it with great care, believe me, and we'll see what happens.
So, Brooke, will you ever have me back on the show? We'll see what happens.
See what happens. You know, there are videos online, linguists analyzing his speech. I've gone down dark, long rabbit holes on that. It's just sort of fascinating to look at. You know, Crystal is
weirdly, Brooke, just very quickly, weirdly for someone who is so sort of all over the place message-wise, he's incredibly on message about certain things. No collusion, electoral college, Democrats. We'll see what happens. We'll walk away, maybe we won't. It's like a mantra, and yet on other things, he's all over the map.
Totally. We'll see what happens. Chris Liza, thank you so much. Thank you.
See what you did there. Thank you.
President Trump's new national security advisor has just raised the prospect of a walkout in the middle of the high-stakes talk with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, set for May or June. The comment sheds some light on why the president said something similar.
If I think that it's a meeting that is not going to be fruitful, we're not going to go. If the meeting, when I'm there, is not fruitful, I will respectfully leave the meeting.
With me now, CNN's chief international correspondent, Christian Amanpour. And Christian, is it possible to say disrespectfully and walk out in the same sentence? Can that even happen? Is there diplomatic protocol for something like that?
Well, look, Brooke, it would be incredibly unusual for that to happen at that level, two heads of state. It would be very, very unusual for just a catastrophic sort of breakdown and a walkout, even if things are not successful. But I think what's clearly happening is that John Bolton, as you mentioned, who is in any event not one who particularly believes in the hard and arduous work of diplomacy and has, as you know, had a worldview that includes, regime change in North Korea, in Iran, using military force and all the rest of it, may not be disposed to the very hard work that it takes to have the kind of negotiation that will be required to get any deal between the United States and North Korea. Just look at the Iran nuclear deal. That took 2 years of negotiations after months of secret talks, and that was kind of a smaller deal than the North Korean one will be because, of course, North Korea has nuclear weapons, Iran did not. And also you have a problem whereby potentially the word denuclearization means two different things to the North Korean leadership and to the United States and the West. They are actually maybe both talking about significantly different things about what exactly they hope to get out of this. And then finally, President Trump is a businessman who uses his art of the deal and his hardball negotiations to effect during his real estate deals. But when you have negotiations with heads of states who have a nuclear weapons program, there has to be a much more nuanced sort of relationship, and it can't just be a zero-sum game. In other words, for President Trump to win, or for the West to win, it doesn't necessarily mean that North Korea must be shown to lose. So a negotiation means that all sides can come out with a sort of win-win, even if it's not equal, and the West gets what it wants. The other side must be made to believe that this is something that it can sell back home, that is palatable, and actually can exist. So, the idea of sort of walking out and all the rest, it seems to be setting up a scenario that if it's not going well, I'm going to be a tough guy and I'm going to show that it's not going to work.
All right, so this meeting's supposed to happen May, June, or maybe not at all, so says the president. Meantime, I have no segue for this. Christian, let's talk sex and love and Shanghai. Roll the clip.
Today's mission is we want to find a beautiful dress for the date. What's the attractive? S, bright color. Okay.
So you think I have a good chance of getting a date?
Yeah, little V-neck.
I could open it more.
Unbuttoned.
There you go. No. No?
It's too deep.
This is too much? Your face, I mean, you look horrified. It's just a little button.
We are good girl.
You're good girl?
Yes, we're good girl. I try to train them to be bad girls.
Bad girls?
Bad girl, yes.
Well, I'm a little bit shocked. They not only look younger, they act young.
Yes. They don't look like the adult women, right? But they are well educated. They work for the multinational company, have very decent pay.
Really?
Yes.
They're very naive.
Unfortunately, yes.
Oh, look, here they come.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, that's gorgeous.
I want to ask you, girls, do you think about romantic and love satisfaction? Do you feel you're missing something?
Yes. Everyone told us study very hard to go to a very good university, to get a very good job, but no one tell us that how to have a very good intimate relationship with the boys.
Christian, living on the edge, unbuttoning your I mean, wow. What's the culture like there?
Well, you just heard it. It's really kind of sad, but it's the reality. You know, women have done so well in Shanghai. It is really going gangbusters. Women are at university, women are in business, women are millionaires in greater numbers than in any other part of China, and yet they have this big hole in their lives when it comes to knowing how to navigate their personal relationships. To the point that you saw, I was with a dating coach teaching girls how to dress, but beyond that, how to act, how to talk, how to, you know, just date a guy. And of course, this in a culture where choosing your own partner is not normal. They've had arranged marriages forever in China. And by the way, Brooke, the segue was China has a huge role to play in the North Korea-US talk.
Leave it to you with the segue, of course. We will not miss back-to-back episodes this Saturday night, Sex and Love with Christian Amanpour, 10 o'clock Eastern and Pacific. Thank you so much. And we are now less than 10 minutes away from Jake's interview, live interview with fired FBI Director James Comey. Hear his response to the breaking news that his former number 2 is facing possible criminal charges. Do not go anywhere.
I wanted to get new blinds. I was talking with my
An historic moment. Moments ago on Capitol Hill, Illinois Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth arrived to cast a vote with her 10-day-old daughter by her side. The Senate unanimously decided last night to allow working moms on the Hill to bring their newborns to work. Senator is the first to give birth while in office as a senator, and our CNN congressional correspondent Sunil Tripathi is with me. I understand you got a chance to get a question in with her as she was heading in with her beautiful baby girl.
That's right, Brooke, and this is certainly not only a big moment for Senator Duckworth here today, but a big moment for the Senate as an institution. And I think Senator Duckworth really did say it best herself when she said, essentially to her fellow senators, welcome to the 21st century, which is certainly an acknowledgement that these long-standing Senate rules in the books really did have to be updated. Today, it was a first, the fact that she was allowed to bring her newborn on the floor to vote with her. This is something that leading up to yesterday, senators could not do. That was a rule that was on the books. That was a rule that they voted to change. And so myself, along with a few other reporters, did catch up with Senator Tammy Duckworth as she arrived on Capitol Hill today with that 10-day-old baby. Here's a little of what she had to say.
Senator, how does it feel to be here?
How are you? It feels great. It's about time.
How do you feel as a mom to be here with Miley?
I think it's historic. I just think it's amazing, and I want to thank all my colleagues for the unanimous consent vote that we can do this. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. She's pretty young to be making history.
She is. You know, hope we're not setting expectations too high for her.
And moments after that, she was welcomed onto the Senate floor to a round of applause from her fellow colleagues as she brought that baby on the floor and cast her vote. But Brooke, she had worked behind the scenes for months with many other senators to make this rule change happen, but not without hurdles. In fact, I heard from many senators that there was a lot of concern up here on Capitol Hill from her colleagues questioning, would she be changing diapers on the floor? Would there be a dress code for this baby? So certainly interesting that those concerns were still voiced as they made this rule change push. Brooke?
Love how you said it. Welcome to the 21st century. Sunlen, thank you so much. That does it for me. I'm Brooke Baldwin. We're going to send it to Jake Tapper. A very special edition of The Lead starts right now.
Welcome to this special edition of The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. By now, you have no doubt heard former FBI Director James Comey detailing his rise and his time as the nation's top law enforcement official and sounding the alarm about the future of America under President Trump. This week, he's been particularly candid in his criticism of the president, who has, of course, fired back, attacking Comey as a, quote, slimeball, even dubbing him Slippery James Comey. But right now, at a crucial moment in this very public war of words about very important issues, there is a lot of breaking news, with a source telling CNN that later today, the Department of Justice is expected to allow Congress to see Comey's memos detailing his interactions with President Trump, and another source saying that the Justice Department is looking at possible criminal charges against Comey's former deputy, Andrew McCabe, for lying about leaking. Amidst this barrage of major breaking news involving James Comey and the Department of Justice, we have with us today the former FBI director and the author of his new book, A Higher Loyalty, Truth, Lies, and Leadership. James Comey, welcome to The Lead. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me here, Jake.
So let's talk about this breaking news. CNN just breaking the story. The Justice Department Inspector General sending a criminal referral to the U.S. Attorney in D.C. regarding your former deputy, Andrew McCabe. They did this after releasing a report concluding McCabe repeatedly lied to investigators and to you about a leak to the Wall Street Journal in which he confirmed, or he had people leak to the Wall Street Journal, confirming the existence of an investigation into the Clinton Foundation. If they ultimately bring a case against Andrew McCabe, would you be a witness for the prosecution?
Potentially. I don't know whether the reporting is accurate. I know it's CNN reporting, but I don't know it of my own accord. But sure, given that the IG's report reflects interactions that Andy McCabe had with me and other FBI senior executives, I could well be a witness.
You express a lot of horror in the book when public officials or even celebrities lie to investigators, whether David Petraeus or Scooter Libby.
Martha Stewart.
Martha Stewart. Yeah. So I would assume that you would be upset at Andrew McCabe. I haven't really heard you criticize him the same way you've criticized those others.
Well, I hope I didn't criticize them personally. I think it's very important.
No, the act, though.
Oh, sure. The act is one I take very seriously, and so does the Department of Justice. What's gone on so far has been the accountability mechanisms of the department working because it's a department that's committed to the truth. And so it's working. I don't know whether there's a criminal referral, what will happen, but that's part of accountability and examination of what the consequences should be if there was material lying.
But how do you feel about your former deputy, according to the Inspector General, lying to you, lying to investigators for a leak that the Inspector General said was only motivated to preserve his own reputation, having nothing to do with the FBI or the public's right to know?
Yeah, conflicted. I like him very much as a person, but sometimes even good people do things they shouldn't do. I've read the report. I'm not the judge in the case. I'm not the discipline decision maker in the case. I think it is accountability mechanisms working, and they should work, because it's not acceptable in the FBI or the Justice Department for people to lack candor. It's something we take really seriously.
The Justice Department is also expected today to begin the process of letting Congress see your memos detailing your interactions with President Trump. Is that the right decision, to let Congress see them?
I don't know, because I don't know what considerations the department has taken into account. It's fine by me.
You don't care?
I don't care. I don't have any views on it. I'm totally fine with transparency. I've tried to be transparent throughout this, and I think what folks will see if they get to see the memos is I've been consistent since the very beginning, right after my encounters with President Trump, and I'm consistent in the book and try to be transparent in the book as well.
Senator Grassley, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, says that there are 7 memos. He says 4 of them are classified. Is that right?
I don't know, because I don't have the memos. I don't know exactly how many there are. Some may be memos, some may be emails. There's somewhere between 5 and 10. It may be 7, it may be 8. I don't remember. And I think some of them, I know when I created some of them, they were classified, but I don't know how many of that group.
One of them is, the classified one is obviously from when you told President Trump in Trump Tower about what was in that 2-page annex about the Steele dossier, the summary of what was in the Steele dossier. What would the other classified ones be about?
Well, I can't answer that if they're classified.
You can't even say the subject of them, terrorism?
Well, there were a number of conversations I had that related to our investigative responsibilities and that I considered classified at the time. And if I go beyond that, I'll be breaking the seal on them.
We're just learning that Bloomberg News is reporting that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein told President Trump that he is not a, quote, target of the Mueller investigation, of the Russia probe. At this point in the investigation, what might that mean, telling the president he's not a target?
I don't know what it means. It's a fairly standard part of any investigation, trying to decide whether a person you're encountering is a witness, a subject, or a target. A target is someone on whom the investigation, the grand jury, has developed significant evidence sufficient to charge. Witness is somebody who has nothing to do with any exposure, and a subject is everybody in the middle. So I don't know the context in which the Deputy Attorney General did that, but that's the general framework.
The president has obviously had a lot of words in response to you for the last year and change, especially this last week. He's called you a liar and a leaker. Our reporting says that a Republican who recently spoke with the president says that the president feels as though he has weathered your book tour. Has he weathered the book tour? Has he come out unscathed?
I have no idea. The book tour is not about the president. It's about my hope that I can be part of facilitating a conversation about our values. President Trump figures in that, obviously, because he's part of the stories I'm trying to tell to illustrate ethical leadership. Because it's not about him, I haven't thought about it in terms of whether he's weathering it or not weathering it.
The book's about President Trump to a great deal. I mean, there's a lot. I read the book. There's a lot in there about your time as a U.S. attorney, about your childhood. But there's a lot in there about President Trump, especially in terms of leadership. He's an example of how not to be a leader, in your view. He is the example of somebody who is a bully. And you talk throughout the book about how you hate bullies.
I think he is a counterpoint. That's why he's in there. I couldn't write about ethical leadership and illustrate it with stories without telling stories of someone I think fails to reflect the values of an ethical leader. So sure, he's 3 of the 14 chapters. It's an important part of the book. But all I meant is it's not a book about Donald Trump, and I hope very much it'll be useful long into the future beyond a Trump presidency.
You've leveled some very tough charges about him. You call him morally unfit. You call his presidency a forest fire. You say he's violating the rule of law. Do you think the nation would be better off if Hillary Clinton had won?
I can't answer that. That's something that hypothetical is too hard for me to go back in time and try and answer.
You paint a pretty dire picture of President Trump. Yeah, it's hard to imagine how you don't think the nation would be better off if Hillary Clinton had won.
Yeah, I don't think about it in those terms, though, Jake. I think we have the current president who was, in my view, legitimately elected, is serving as president. The question is he adhering to our values? He's clearly not. So what do we do about it? And I think the first thing we do is not get numb to it. When he calls for the jailing of private citizens in his tweets, don't shrug, but realize that's not okay, that's not normal.
It's interesting that you won't go as far to say that Hillary Clinton would be, the nation would be better off if Hillary were president, because you have called for the nation to respond to the challenge of Trump, in your view, by voting, presumably by voting against what he represents. Is that not a fair interpretation?
I actually think of it, maybe it's the same thing, but I think of it in terms of voting for something else, which is the core values of this country, which are more important than any policy dispute. So I don't care whether people find that in a Republican or a Democrat or neither. It's important that our leaders reflect those values, because that's all we are.
So you have spent decades building a reputation for being evidence-based, for being nonpartisan. The FBI is an organization that is supposed to be evidence-based and nonpartisan. Do you worry that by painting this stark portrait of President Trump and suggesting that the American people should vote for something other than the lack of values that he represents in your construct, that you are sullying both the brand of Comey and the brand of the FBI?
Yeah, I don't think so, and I certainly hope not, because I'm not criticizing President Trump because he's a Republican or because he has a certain view on taxes or immigration or anything else. I'm criticizing him on the grounds of values, which is at the center of the FBI, and something that should be at the center of all of our evaluations of our leaders. So I get that it's relevant to politics, but I see it as something actually more important than partisan politics.
Something you said to me in one of your interviews stood out. Quote, if you've been investigating something for almost a year and you don't have a general sense of where it's likely to end up, you should be fired because you're incompetent. You write something similar to that in the book, and it's you explaining why you wrote the letter, basically exonerating Hillary Clinton from criminal behavior before you had even interviewed her. But let's apply that same standard to the Mueller investigation. You oversaw the Russia investigation for almost 10 months. Do you have a general sense of how that investigation is going to end up?
In some respects, I did at the time, but not completely. I suspect that the team that's investigating it now has a general sense. I have no idea what that is. But again, it's a general feeling that on the current course and speed, we're likely to end up in this direction or that direction.
And where did you think it was going to end up? Did you think it was going to end up with people around President Trump being found guilty of conspiring, aiding and abetting with Russians?
I can't say. I've left that out of the book for reasons that should be obvious. I can't talk about classified information or sensitive investigative details, so I'm not going to say.
But your sense of where the investigation was headed is not classified. It's just your impression. And obviously the investigation has continued since then. Why won't you say? I mean, people want to know. You have left the impression that there's something there in your interviews. You have said, when asked, do the Russians have something on President Trump, you've said it's possible. It's possible, which is not a very FBI director answer, don't you think?
No, I think it's an honest and calibrated answer.
Well,
so I hope that's an FBI, I'm not the FBI director, but I hope that's an FBI director type answer.
Well, when you gave the press conference about Hillary Clinton in 2016 in the summer, you said, you didn't say she didn't lie, or you didn't say it's possible she lied. You said you found no evidence that she had lied. Mm-hmm. You found no evidence that she had that email server knowing that it was improper. But you're not using the same construct of there is evidence or there isn't evidence. You're saying it's possible. That leaves the impression for people that there might be stuff out there, that there might be evidence that President Trump is under the thumb of the Kremlin.
Yeah, but I see that, Jake, as you're asking me about two different things. I'm not going to talk about the investigation of possible cooperation between Americans and the Russian effort to influence our election. What you're asking me about now is, why did I say what I said when people asked me whether I thought it was possible that the Russians had derogatory information on President Trump? I think it's unlikely, but I think it's possible.
But isn't that construct unfair to President Trump in a way? Because the question was if President Trump was compromised by the Russians. You say it's possible. I don't think it's likely, but it's possible. I mean, it's possible there's life on other planets. We don't know. For you, somebody like you with your reputation, saying it's possible it's also possible that it's not true. Isn't that another way you could look at the same question?
Sure, but I'm not looking to the stars saying there might be green men out there. There's a reason I say it's possible. two things struck me. One, the president's constantly bringing it up with me to deny it. And in my experience as an investigator, it's not an ironclad rule, but it's a striking thing when someone constantly brings up something to deny that you didn't ask about. And then second, I've always been struck in my encounters with him that he wouldn't criticize Vladimir Putin even in private, which struck me as odd. Now, those aren't definitive, those aren't conclusive facts, but the reason I'm saying it's possible is there are things that lead my common sense to believe it's possible.
But isn't that kind of cute? I mean, you're not saying that you have evidence of it, you're just saying it's possible. I mean, do you have evidence that President Trump has been compromised by the Russians? Have you seen evidence of it?
No, and I think I've said that throughout. I'm trying to be transparent as here's my reasoning. Here's why an honest answer has to be it's possible. Now, I'm not saying it's likely. In fact, I've said all along, and I'm repeating it to you here today, it's unlikely in my view, but it's possible.
So let's talk about the investigation and what you can talk about it. In January 2017, when you met with President Trump and you did that oral presentation of what's in that two-page memo summarizing the Steele dossier, we know from the book that you talked about these unverified allegations involving him and prostitutes. Did you brief him about any of the other things in the Steele dossier, claims that his associates, Michael Cohen or Paul Manafort, were potentially working with the Russians, or was it only about the prostitutes?
It was only about the salacious part of it.
Why? Why only about that?
Because that was the part that the leaders of the intelligence community agreed he needed to be told about, because we knew it and thought it was about to become public. And if it was true, we didn't know whether it was true, it would be important to let him know this as part of a defensive briefing.
While we're on the subject of the dossier, by the time you left, how much of it do you think you were able to either prove to be correct, verify, or debunk?
The work was still underway. I wouldn't be able to say anyway if I was still there, but the work was still underway when I was fired.
Some of it, is it fair to say that some of it you verified as true and some of it you debunked as false?
I think all I can say is a core part of it was consistent with lots of other intelligence, core part of it being the Russians are engaged in an orchestrated campaign to influence the American election.
Michael Cohen, I want to ask you about him. He's now under criminal investigation by the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, your former job. CNN's reporting that one of President Trump's former lawyers is warning the president that Michael Cohen could flip. And also we're hearing, and lots of people have reported, that President Trump and his advisors are much more concerned about the investigation into Michael Cohen than they are into the Russia investigation. Put on your legal analyst hat for a second. Why might that be? Why would they be more worried about Michael Cohen than about Robert Mueller?
I'm going to resist putting on the legal analyst hat. You've got all these awesome legal analysts at CNN. I'm not one of them.
We know that Cohen's name is in the Steele dossier. We know that the FBI has been trying to verify whether or not the entire dossier is true or not. Is he vulnerable in the Russia investigation, Michael Cohen?
That's not something I can answer.
In the book, you detail several interactions with the president that made you uncomfortable. Ultimately, you accepted President Trump's dinner invitation. You promised honest loyalty. You later agreed that Michael Flynn, was a good man. Now, you write that your experience in high school gave you a, quote, lifelong hatred for bullies. Do you think President Trump is a bully, and do you hate him?
I definitely don't hate him. There are things he does that make me uncomfortable and I think are inappropriate, that are in some ways like a bully-like behavior, but I don't hate Donald Trump. I don't even dislike Donald Trump.
I want to ask you a devil's advocate question about President Trump. You were a person who privately briefed him about this salacious allegation involving prostitutes. Is it not possible that President Trump, when he asked for your loyalty, had in his mind the idea that here's an FBI director, the only FBI director I'm really familiar with is J. Edgar Hoover, and I know he blackmailed politicians all the time. Is it not possible that he thought he was asking for your loyalty because he was worried that you were going to drop all this incriminating information on him that may or may not have been true?
It's possible.
It's possible.
I'm only saying that because you said that.
I want to get clarity on something else that you said this week. You said this week that President Trump, quote, treats women like meat. Is that from some personal experience that you saw or heard about, or is that just from things that he has said?
Just from media, not from personal experience.
I want to ask specifically about, if you could put on your hat, your legal analyst hat. I'm going to ask you one more time.
Which I'm refusing to put on.
You're refusing to do. But to look at, I know you've been asked about the obstruction of justice charge, and you said it's possible that there's an obstruction of justice case to be made, specifically with firing you and asking you, after the meeting where he asked you to drop the Flynn matter. Look at the conspiracy matter. aiding and abetting, when I know collusion is not an actual criminal charge.
Good.
If you look at what there is there, we know the Russians hacked the Democrats. We know that at least 2 people in the Trump world, Papadopoulos and Trump Jr., were approached by people with Kremlin ties and told about dirt on Hillary Clinton. We know that there is an expression of a desire for that information. We know that 2 people in the Trump world reached out to Julian Assange. We know that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks published these emails, and we know that President Trump made a lot of hay out of those emails. First of all, am I missing anything? Is there anything else in the conspiracy that we don't know?
I can't answer that.
Of everything I just said, which is all in the public domain, is that enough for a conspiracy charge against anybody?
It's really not something I can answer. I would say this. You'd certainly, if you're the special prosecutor, want to understand those facts and any around them to try and make that analysis.
But is there a case there?
You don't want me to say it's possible again. It's possible, but I don't know.
You write in the book about your controversial decision to notify Congress that you were reopening the Clinton investigation just a few days before the election. You've been asked a lot about this, so I'm not going to ask the same questions other people have. But you did say you were thinking at the time, quote, if I hide this from the American people, she'll be illegitimate the moment she's elected. Didn't that happen except to Donald Trump? In other words, you didn't disclose, and I understand why you didn't, but you didn't disclose the Russia investigation to the American people. And now there are a lot of people who think he's illegitimate, and it's something that he himself thinks is a cloud hanging over his presidency. Didn't, in avoiding, possibly of trying to avoid doing one thing to Hillary Clinton, you did it to Trump?
I don't think so, because I think of the 2 investigations, and everybody working on it in the Department of Justice and the FBI did as well, as quite different. Very early stage counterintelligence investigation of Americans, not Donald Trump, a small group trying to figure out, is there any connection between those people and the Russian effort? Separate from the Russian effort, which we had important discussions about whether to publicize that, but I don't know what we would have said in the early stages. We weren't investigating Donald Trump. We had just started. I think there actually wasn't serious consideration given to it because it wouldn't be remotely appropriate under our policies.
You call it very early stages in October 2016, but you disclosed it in March 2017. That's only 5 months later. Was there really such a difference in terms of disclosing it?
But only in a general way. I mean, 5 months later, we informed Congress that there was an investigation, but didn't say anything more about that. And the reason for that is the acting Attorney General decided there was such pressure from Congress. Senator Grassley was holding up the confirmation of the Deputy Attorney General unless he got more information, that there were important prudential reasons for the Department of Justice to say something in general about it 5 months later.
You admit in your book that you made 2 mistakes in the Clinton investigation. One of them was using the phrase extremely careless to describe Secretary Clinton's handling of classified information. You said that was a mistake. What phrase should you have used?
I don't know. Even in hindsight, I haven't come up with a better way to capture that it was something above mere sloppiness. We're talking about 8 top secret emails, dozens of secret emails. And so we were trying to find a way to honestly describe something that was above just ordinary carelessness, leaving a document on a counter at a restaurant or something by accident, and criminal misconduct. It was between those 2.
But you still don't have a phrase that would have been.
I still don't. You might expect I've kind of suppressed the effort to try and figure it out since then.
After you were fired, President Trump tweeted that there might be tapes of your private conversations. You say you decided to ask your friend to then leak some information about your interactions with the president. Not classified information, but information about your interactions with the president. And you say you did this, you testified that you did this to try to force the creation of a special counsel. Why? Why would a special counsel be needed? Why would the Department of Justice and FBI not be able to continue to do the job?
Because I thought that the department, as currently supervised, would not be aggressive enough to go serve process to get the tapes.
Because Jeff Sessions is too weak.
Well, he had recused himself. And
so Rod Rosenstein was too weak.
There was a new Deputy Attorney General who I didn't have confidence in given what I'd seen around my firing. And so I thought something has to be done, because there were lots of discussions in public then about appointing a special prosecutor. Something has to be done to push them to appoint someone who will have the gumption to go get the tapes.
What do you say to people who say, boy, that seems awfully manipulative, not your role, and maybe even it seems like payback?
Yeah, I don't think of it that way. I was a private citizen who saw something I could do. I thought that was very, very important, and I did it, and it obviously acknowledged it the moment I was asked about it publicly. I thought it was something that needed to be done, and a private citizen can talk about their unclassified conversations with the president.
Yeah, but the average private citizen doesn't think to him or herself, I'm going to leak this information so as to force the creation of a special counsel. I mean, it's an extraordinary gambit that you made, and obviously it paid off, and congratulations, but it's not the kind of thing that the average private citizen would do.
Of course not. But the average private citizen, first of all, I don't take any joy in it, so I don't accept the congratulations. But the average private citizen didn't have a one-on-one conversation with the President of the United States where he asked him to drop a criminal investigation and then tweet at him after he's fired that he better hope there aren't tapes. I was in a position, given what I knew, to do something that would be useful and important, and so I did it. And reasonable people can disagree about it, but I still think it was the right thing to do.
I asked you earlier about Andrew McCabe, your deputy. I also want to ask you about FBI agents Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, who worked at the FBI. There's been a lot in the news about text messages they sent back and forth in which they disparaged a lot of people, including President Trump. Now, you say you had no idea that they were having an affair or about the text messages, and I take you at your word. But put yourself in Donald Trump's shoes for 1 second. You're Donald Trump, and you feel this is unfair, this investigation. You find out that Peter Strzok, the lead FBI agent, is texting somebody disparaging things about you, and then you find out that he's the one that actually helped conduct the Hillary Clinton interview, and he called you an idiot. Wouldn't you think that this whole thing was unfair and politicized?
Sure, I get why he'd be very concerned about that. It's the reason Bob Mueller removed Peter Strzok, who's an excellent agent, but removed him from that investigation. It's poor judgment, and it shouldn't happen. So I get the concern about it.
Your book is about leadership throughout. Does it say anything about your leadership that Strzok, who was a very high-level FBI agent, was doing this? Did you set in any way any sort of tone where that kind of glib insult of a major political candidate at the time would be not that big a deal?
No, but it does say something about my leadership. I mean, I'm responsible for the senior members of my team, and I've asked myself the same question. I tried to model a certain way of acting, which did not include that kind of behavior, but I asked myself, should I have given them all a speech? But these are grown-ups. These are senior people in the counterintelligence division. I don't want to be too tough on myself, but yeah, I'm responsible. I'm responsible for their actions and their poor judgment.
Speaking of leadership, after you were fired, you say you got a phone call from then Department of Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly, now the Chief of Staff at the White House, in which he referred to the president as dishonorable and was talking about quitting. You told him not to quit. Were you surprised when he took a job as the White House Chief of Staff, and have you been surprised to see him as one of President Trump's strongest defenders?
I don't remember John calling the president dishonorable. He was talking about people, and I don't like you being treated this way, and I won't stay and work with people that would treat you in such a dishonorable way.
Who else would he be talking about?
Well, I don't know, but he didn't. I just want to be clear. He didn't say the president by name.
That's fair, and I appreciate the clarification. But just to dial down on this point, who else would he be talking about? Who else mistreated you other than President Trump, in his view or your view?
No, that's fair. I don't know what he had in his head, but he might have meant